The gods held infinite power. They created thunder, the seas, and even the destiny of mankind. But hidden behind the shining veil of mythology were tales of desire, passion, and brutal jealousy. From Zeus with his countless forbidden affairs, to Aphrodite, the goddess of love with secrets no one could imagine, the sexuality of the gods was never just about pleasure. It was the spark of tragedy, power, and wars that shook the heavens themselves. Are you ready to explore the most seductive dark side of Greek mythology? Join me as we step into a world where divine desire shaped the fate of humanity. You are watching videos on the Good Stories channel. You're an open-hearted, generous person, so giving this video a like is no big deal for you. But for me, that one like is an incredible source of motivation to keep improving and making better videos. Thank you so much, and now, let's get back to the story. Beth Danson was about 25 and, besides her deep auburn brown hair and lovely face, she boasted an equally attractive body. He found himself captivated by the warm thrust of her breasts beneath the silk blouse. The clear milk of her flesh at the V of her throat excited him in a strange way. When he thought of her as his wife, it was frightening, as though someone had tossed him a woman and expected him to just fall into marriage. It wouldn't be hard to come to love this woman, but it would take a while. Hell, he didn't know her. She was a complete stranger who had suddenly told him they were married. There was nothing familiar about her. Even the fingers that were softly working over his face were alien. He was lying on a strangely made bed, the warm breezes of evening rolling in off the crashing sea, and the woman stood in the ornate doorway of the bedroom. Her hair was as gold as the noon sun, and her eyes, lifting slightly at the outer curves, were as blue as the sea. Her lips petaled back over the white strength of her teeth, and her fingers made the flimsy robe drop from her shoulders. Then his fingers curled about the curve of her thigh. His fingers tightened and the crimson smile broadened. He pulled and felt her resist him with maidenly demureness, but in the end she came to him. He felt the yielding firmness of her body pressing down into his on the bed, and his arms furled about the softness that she offered. The warm cones of her breasts worked on the hardness of his chest, and his mouth fused against hers. He left the mothership and headed for Terra. He smiled at the instrument panel and watched the operation of the big scout ship as it rocketed toward the light ribbon of atmosphere that enveloped the planet. It was a joke, in a way. In a manner of speaking, he was the first Terran to fly an alien spaceship, but he wasn't thinking of that. He was thinking of the woman, Elizabeth Danson of Everett, Pennsylvania. She was waiting, and he could see the warmth of her body, sheathed in the web-like gown that seemed spun over her turgid breasts and curved hips by an army of artistic spiders. It would not be a hard thing to love a woman like that. His fingers curled about the controls, his feet working the rudder pedals of the screaming ship as he headed for the strange darkness of the Atlantic Ocean. The spaceship was operating well, and the Earth lifted her curved bosom to meet his rush. Trouble came early. The danger lights flickered in his eyes, and the fear welled up within him like a flood. 1,500 miles an hour, and the scout ship was out of control. Trouble came early. The danger lights flickered in his eyes, and the fear welled up within him like a flood. 1,500 miles an hour, and the scout ship was out of control. The behavior of the craft was erratic, as though a giant hand was slapping the silver belly as he plummeted toward the ball of the earth, helpless against the violent plunge. Desperately, he tried to reduce the speed of the hurtling ship, his fingers working the buttons and levers in a frenzy of determination. The craft refused to respond. She whipped into a cloud bank, headed for the sea, lifted suddenly, and whirled back toward space. In an agony of fear, he realized he was no longer the master of the spaceship. He was a prisoner in a violent, uncontrollable meteor that would finally slam him into infinity against the very Earth that was to be home, the thought tearing into his mind. In the early hours of morning, Jean Renaud of Nova Scotia fingered the wheel of his 50-foot boat through the grey ground swells of the Grand Banks, nearing the place to cast nets. The overcast sky refused to emit sunlight, and a light mist hung over the sea like a disjointed ghost. When Jean heard the whirring roar of the ship, it was already too late. The silver streak whipped over his fishing boat with all the furies of the gods, nearly tearing his steading sail away. Muttering French curses, Jean seized his radio telephone. He reported in violent tones the presence of the jet to the Coast Guard, In the half-light of early dawn, the United States and Canada whirled with reports upon the strange craft. The CQ of the National Defense System began systematically pinpointing the track of the strange craft as it raked across the autumnal sky. Then, it was gone, vanished in an instant. The rocketing ship had appeared over one observation station near Lake Ontario. It had been spotted by a sea-doo worker near Auburn, New York, and then it was gone from their sight. The last observation of the craft showed it flying an erratic track toward the mountain country of Pennsylvania. At CQ Operations Office in Washington, D.C., LT, Colonel Griswold frowned. He tossed the last report on his desk and pinched his lower lip thoughtfully. Colonel Delbert, sitting across from him, looked serious, weighing the possibility with concern. "It's out of control," he mused, "and it isn't one of ours, Russian." Might be. He studied the rugged country on the Pennsylvania, New York map and then reached for the phone. "This is Colonel Griswold. Get me the Pentagon. At 0930 a special plane left Washington, bound for the town in northern Pennsylvania that had been chosen as a base of operations. On board the plane were the Secret Service men assigned to track down the crashed ship. But they were several hours too late, the wreck already lying silent beneath the skies. Trouble came early, the danger lights flickered in his eyes and the fear welled up within him like a flood. 1,500 miles an hour and the scout ship was out of control." Colonel Delbert, sitting across from him, looked serious. "It's out of control," he mused, "and it isn't one of ours, Russian." Might be. He looked at the rugged country along the Pennsylvania, New York map for a moment, then he picked up the phone on his desk. "This is Colonel Griswold. Get me the Pentagon. At 0930 a special plane left Washington, bound for the town in northern Pennsylvania. That town had been chosen as a base of operations. On board the plane were the Secret Service men who were to track down the crashed ship. They were several hours too late." He awakened to flame and smoke, and it was as though he had been born again. About him lay thick, summer-cloaked forests and heavy carpets of laurel and brush. Obviously, it was some sort of plane that was burning nearby and he had probably been in it. In his mind, he remembered only the blinding flash of white light. Then a sea of darkness had enveloped him. Whether he had been thrown clear of the wreck or whether he had crawled, he didn't know. But the torn flying suit convinced him. It convinced him that he had once been airborne in that battered craft. The heavy, canvas-like material of the flying suit had protected the blue serge business suit underneath, so that besides a ripped pocket it was presentable. He grinned wryly in the pre-dawn darkness. Presentable to whom? The squirrels. He peeled off the flying suit and added it. He added it to the flaming wreckage, then staggered off through the night toward the valley below. There was usually, he recalled, water in ravines to ease the thirst. He used small saplings for handholds while his head thumped and thundered wildly. Probing fingers found a lump beneath blood-matted hair that was sensitive to the touch. There was a scratch on his cheek, sealed with dried blood, and his hands were skinned as though he had broken a fall in cinders with them. It was, he decided, amazing. Amazing that he had survived a plane crash with so little injury. But then, stranger things had happened. There was a run at the bottom of the hill, a leaf-choked creek. One of those meandering little creeks that become stagnant pools in July and August, and raging torrents of brown water in the spring, coursing through the valleys. Lying on a sloping, flat rock, he thrust his face into the stream and drank deeply, feeling the life flow from the water into the weariness of his body. He washed his face in it, splashing it over his head until his mind began to function with familiar clarity. But he still did not know who he was. When he tried to search backward into the past, he could see only the white flash and the darkness. It was frightening, as if memory of his past life had been cut away. He fumbled through his pockets, found the wallet and the cigarette lighter, and began flipping through the cards with the help of the tiny lighter flame in his hands. An identification card labeled him Nicholas Howard Danson and stated that he lived at 2312 Weissman Drive, Everett, Pennsylvania. There was also draft, social security, and driver's license card. The others were membership certificates to various clubs and organizations. Finally, there were several pictures of himself and a woman. In fact, there were a great many pictures of the woman. One was a portrait of her, inscribed, "Love, Beth," which told him she was either a girlfriend or his wife. Nick extinguished the light and put the wallet away. In his shirt pocket he found a crumpled pack of cigarettes. He shook one out, lit it and dragged the smoke down deep into his lungs while he pondered over his newly discovered self. Of course, the proper thing to do would be to get to a phone, call the law, call the local authorities and explain the crash. The law would help him get home and check him out. That was the proper thing, but he wasn't about to do the proper thing. He was a stranger to himself. Who was he? What was he? He could well be outside the law, a criminal. Then what? Turn yourself in, Danson, he grimaced, and discover that you are wanted by the law for something. To hell with that. Get to this Beth woman and get some answers to a few questions before you bring in the law. Apparently no one had seen the crash, no one knew he was here. Perhaps it would be better to leave it like that until he had a chance to find out what he was up against. He decided not to contact anyone. When it was light enough he would look for a ride to somewhere. At a gas station he could find out where he was and wherever it was. Then, by thumbing, he could get a ride to where he lived. If this Beth woman was his wife, she could fill him in. There was plenty of time to call the law later. Sleep, when he tried it, refused to come. There were too many unanswered questions rocketing around in his brain. Well, he had to find a road, sooner or later. Perhaps the more distance he put between himself and the wreck, the better it would be for him. He took a final drink of water from the creek and stood up again. His sore, battered muscles protested violently. Then he began to stumble through the autumnal forests to find a road. It was getting light when he found the highway. It was small and narrow, bedded with pebbly asphalt with a faded white line down the middle that told him it was not a first-class road, stretching among hemlocks. He grinned, wondering vaguely which direction he should travel to get to Everett. Finally, he pulled a quarter from his pocket and flipped it into the air, catching it deftly. Heads, I go to the right. Tails, I go to the left. Heads won and he started off toward the right, the stiffness and weariness dragging at him like a weight tied to his legs. While he walked, he studied the pictures in his wallet, noting happily that it also contained $20 in bills. That was comforting in the emptiness around him. In the daylight, the picture of Beth that had looked pretty in the flame of the lighter became beautiful. Although it was black and white, Nick decided that her hair was brown. It swept about a soft, heart-shaped face like a cloud. The image was smiling at him and he felt that if she was not his wife, he hoped deeply that she was his girl. It was late in the morning when he found the service station. It was a small, lonely, isolated place that sported 2 pumps and a cramped-looking lube rack. Through the open door of the washroom, Nick could see the shoes and coverall legs of the attendants sticking out from under a Ford. He found a dime in his pocket for a drink. He treated himself to a cold drink while he tried to figure out where he was. Across the highway a marker told him that he was on Route 87, winding through the land. He pulled a Pennsylvania map from the rack inside the door, not entirely sure he was in Pennsylvania. Unfolding it, he found Everett and saw Route 87 ran through the town, but it was difficult to puzzle out whether he was north or south of the place. He refolded the map and stuffed it into his pocket, glancing around at the surroundings. On the far side of the office was a door marked men, just what he wanted. His clothes, his hair and his face needed repairs before he could confront Everett's people. In a mirror, with most of the backing peeling away, he discovered that Nick Danson was rather good looking, if you overlooked the damage, dirt, blood and stubble shadow. The mop of tangled black hair had red splotches from the blood he'd lost. He filled the bowl with tepid water and soaped his face and hands vigorously, though it hurt. After washing most of the blood from his hair, he found a comb in a pocket and whipped some order into the matted, dark mass. The attendant was at the counter. He was an elderly man with receding grey hair, a hawk nose and grizzled features set firmly into a face that looked like a dried apple. He grinned, gold tooth flashing. Thought I heard someone in here, he said around the chew that patched his cheek. Car break down on you? I'm walking, Nick told him plainly and waited. You're a long way from any kind o' town, some ... Say, he said suddenly noticing the scratch marks. Why been fighting a bobcat? Nick shook his head, fishing for a lie. Got drunk last night and into a brawl. My friends pitched me out of the car in a moment of playfulness. He hoped bitterness in his tone would make it ring true. The old man chuckled softly. "Darn shame, son, you from around here?" "New York," Nick lied. "I'm staying in Everett." The old man cackled at the familiar name. "Everett? Hell, that's 15 miles south of here, or better." He paused, swiveled his head and spat brown juice through the door. "Ain't no one going that way, I know. S'pose he could thumb it, but it'd be hard, lonely road, you see. If you don't mind waiting till after supper, I'll run down to town, drop you off where you want to go." "Hadn't thought of waiting so long," Nick told him. "What would I do? Just sit here? Hell no. In th back room there's a cot. Been sleeping there myself sometimes. Since m'wife passed along back in 53, December of 53 it was. I'll wake ye, come supper thanks." With hunger gnawing, Nick took a cellophane-wrapped pie to eat. He handed the old man a quarter. "So funny," the old man said. "You don't smell like a drunk." "Ought some liquor smell to why, son, I was drinking vodka," Nick said, wondering how he had pulled that from a mind that could not recall his past. He took another bite of pie as the old man gave him change, still watching curiously. "Bad stuff. Vodka. That's th slop them Russian hassocks drink, ain't it?" "I think so. Well, it ain't for Andy Hokum. Them hassocks can have it," he grumbled. Nick was saved from further conversation by a new station wagon pulling into the pumps. A young woman, dressed in a suit, cut the engine and honked the horn briefly. Andy waved and headed for the door. "Get some shut-eye, son." "I'll wake why later, thanks, Andy." He finished the last of the pie and watched Andy work on the wagon. Nick cleared the pie wrapper off the small counter and tossed it into a box as he headed for the back room. After closing the door, he fell onto the bed and into sleep. The craft refused to respond. She whipped into a cloud bank, headed for the sea, lifted suddenly and whirled back toward space. In an agony of fear, he realized that he no longer was the master of the spaceship. He was a prisoner in a violent, uncontrollable meteor. It would finally slam him into infinity against the very earth that was to be home. He was almost to the place where he would cast his nets into the water. The overcast sky was refusing to emit the sunlight. A light mist hung over the sea like a disjointed ghost. When Jean heard the whirring roar of the ship, it was too late. The silver streak whipped over his fishing boat with all the furies of the gods and nearly tore his steading sail away. Muttering a string of French curses, Jean picked up his radio telephone and reported in violent tones the presence of the jet to the Coast Guard. In the half-light of early dawn, the United States and Canada whirled with reports upon the strange craft. Then, it was gone. The rocketing ship had appeared over one observation station near Lake Ontario. It had been spotted by a sea-doo worker near Auburn, NY. Then it was gone. The last observation showed it flying erratically toward Pennsylvania. At CQ Operations Office in Washington, D.C., LT, Colonel Martin Griswold tossed the last report on his desk and pinched his lower lip thoughtfully. The dream was of a woman. He was lying on a strangely made bed, the warm breezes of evening rolling in off the crashing sea, and the woman stood in the ornate doorway. About him lay all manner of bright silks and strange colored cloths. The woman smiled and his eyes caressed her, drinking in her beauty as the dream unfolded. Her hair was as gold as the noon sun and her eyes, lifting slightly at the outer corners, were as blue as the sea. Her lips petaled back over the white strength of her teeth. Her fingers did strange things to make the flimsy robe drop from the rounded softness of her shoulders. He watched her walk, upon curvaceous legs, to the edge of the bed. For just a second, she smiled down at him. "Father is sleeping like a baby," she whispered. He felt himself talk. "Good." Then his fingers curled about her thigh. His fingers tightened and the crimson smile broadened. He pulled and felt her resist him with maidenly demureness, but in the end she came to him willingly. He felt the yielding firmness of her body pressing down into his on the bed, and his arms furled about the softness she offered, their mouths fusing in a passionate kiss. Loz, darling, you've been gone so long." Her voice was a kitten purr in his ear, warm and gentle. "I'm back, Yellow," he smiled, caressing her body tightly. She moved away from him, rolling, tugging at him to respond, but he needed no encouragement. His body rolled with her, his arms pinning her to him tightly so she could move nothing but her legs, but then there was little need to move anything else. The dream faded and he cursed and tried to get back to sleep, and the beautiful woman, Sleep came, but the dream was gone. Andy, shaking his shoulder, woke him about sundown, and Nick swung his legs off the cot and stood up, still sleepy and dazed. He fingered the heavy stubble on his face and looked at the old man. "You can use my razor, chop off that beard, son," he said. "Come on, get around now. Got soup and sandwiches ready and some famous hokum coffee." Nick straightened his wrinkled clothing, shaking the last remnants of weary fog from his brain. Andy went on talking to him kindly. Andy said something that woke Nick Danson up completely. "Your buddies was here couple of hours ago, son." "What?" It was almost impossible to hide his surprise. Andy didn't seem to notice. Fellas you got drunk with. Wanted to know if I'd seen any strangers on Road. I said I hadn't. Figured they might slap you around again. Thanks, Andy. Who could possibly know about the plane crash? If the wreck had been found, it would be police asking questions, not to strangers searching for him. Somebody, somewhere, was searching for him. Who? And what did they want? Fingers of fear and worry flitted along his spine as he thought about the situation. When they had finished eating, Nick shaved, cleaned himself up and followed Andy out to where his car was parked. He found that he liked the old man despite everything, but under the circumstances conversation was difficult. The plane crash was odd. The burning wreckage had shown no signs of wings or a tail assembly at all, but that was probably minor. The wings could have been ripped off by trees. The important thing was that someone knew he was here. That fact disturbed him deeply. As they drove toward Everett, the old man talked about the strangers who had inquired earlier in the day. "Nope," I says to the big fella, "ain't seen a soul on foot all day. 'Cept in, of course, Jimmy Dilson, going down Twiller Creek, fish." That seemed to satisfy them, so they lit out. "Notice what kind of car they drove, Andy?" Nick asked. "Yep," gave him gas. They was driven a Chevrolet. Looked to be a 56 or a 57, black, it was. Blacker'n inside of a coal bin, with the shiniest chrome you ever saw. "Sounds like them," Nick told him, enlarging the lie. "One of them short and the other medium." "Not exactly. The one did all the talking had a funny accent. Anyways, he was about 6 feet, 3 or 4, and heavy good looking, with blonde hair. The other guy was about your build, with sandy hair, never talked. That guy. They're the ones." Nick lied and shook a cigarette from a half-empty pack. "Thanks for not giving me away." Andy nodded, lapsing into silence while Nick concentrated. Nick thought of coming home to a strange woman and the two men who had been asking after him. For some reason, he felt Beth Danson was his wife and accepted it. She couldn't be his sister. Besides, a man his age would likely be married. He wondered vaguely how she would welcome him, but cast the thought aside for later. As they approached Everett in the twilight, Andy turned to him. "Where do you want off, son?" "Weissman Drive, know it?" "Yep. We're almost there. Suburban area, just north of town. You got friends there?" "Yes," Nick grinned inwardly. That is, he thought, I hope she's a friend. Hell, I don't know whether she hates me or loves me. But she's the only one that can help. A frightening gloom fell over him suddenly. Andy lapsed into silence and the motor's sound became loud in Nick's ears. Nick continued to ponder the strange men and the woman he was coming home to, but it was like bashing his head against a wall. He could remember nothing concrete. And, through his thoughts, the memory of the dream returned. It was the most vivid dream he had ever had, almost as though it was real, haunting him deeply. Abruptly, Andy brought the car to a stop before a sign that read, Weissman Drive. Nick thanked him and climbed out onto the road. The old man waved and left. For a moment, he stood watching Andy's car fade, then began walking along the road, looking for 2312 Weissman Drive and trying to ignore the fear welling within him. When he finally found it, he saw that it was a two-story place, white frame, trimmed with a darker color, probably blue. A garage stood beside and a good lawn in front. There was no evidence of children. A light in the front room told him someone was home, likely Beth, and caution told him to make sure no friends were with her. He slipped quietly up on the porch and looked briefly into the window. Beth was there, sitting on the sofa reading a book, her hair brown with a reddish cast. She was every bit as beautiful as the picture he carried in his pocket. He knocked on the door. It occurred to him, after rapping, that this was his own house. Why should he rap? But what was done, was done. He waited until she opened the door and stood looking at him. He tried a smile, but Beth's eyes widened in shock. Her lips parted in astonishment. "Nick," she whispered, as though she had seen a ghost, and fell to the floor in a dead faint. Stunned, he stepped into the room. He lifted her limp body and laid her on the sofa. He began patting her face and hands to revive her, wondering what the hell he had done to cause her to faint so. Why the devil was she so shocked to see him, he wondered. Was she in love with another man, and had they rigged the plane to crash to be rid of him? He shivered. If they had tried to kill him, no wonder she fainted at the sight. The rings on her left hand bragged she was married, probably to him, but why faint at his return? He was deciding whether to stay or run, when her lash fluttered and she came to. Her eyes dilated in astonishment, but this time she did not pass out again. "You are watching videos on the Good Stories channel. You're an open-hearted, generous person, so giving this video a like is no big deal for you." Her soft arms slid about his neck and she pulled him down to kiss him. Her warm lips caressed his face, kissing his mouth, cheeks and eyes, murmuring his name joyfully. Had news of the crash reached her? Did they presume him dead? Was that why she fainted and now rejoiced? His mind whirled with questions his memory could not answer. "Oh, Nick," she murmured. "Where have you been?" "I don't know. I've been in a crack up, Beth. I can't remember anything. She pushed him away, alarmed at his face. "Darling, your face. You're hurt, just scratches," he told her swiftly. "Nothing serious, Beth. You've got to help me, please." He felt ashamed and confused, asking, "Of course I'll help you, darling. I'm your wife. Now come out to the kitchen where I can patch you up." Suddenly she burst into tears and held him close, sobbing. He held her until she stopped crying, then allowed himself to be led into the kitchen. She applied iodine and band-aids while weariness dragged him toward darkness. Beth was about 25, auburn hair, lovely face, and an equally attractive body. He was captivated by her, yet frightened at the thought of being her husband. It was as though someone had tossed him a woman and expected marriage. It wouldn't be hard to love her, but she was a stranger suddenly telling him they were married. Even her fingers softly working over his face were alien. Alien. That's it. The whole damned world is alien, and I don't know who I am, who I've been. "Beth," he asked suddenly, "how long have I been gone? You act as though it's been a long while. Double quotes, a long while. Darling, how long?" he pressed anxiously. She looked at him seriously. 13 months, she whispered, her voice shaking. 13 months. He relaxed heavily in the chair, staring at her dumbfoundedly. Over a year. Where had he been? Why hadn't he been located before now? 13 months, he croaked. She nodded. "Every police agency in the country has looked. I've had detectives hunting. Nolan Bryce has done everything he could, but no one could. It was as though you had disappeared from the face of the earth." "Nolan Bryce?" Nick asked. "Your best friend. She realized he knew nothing. Her eyes filled, hopeless now swelling. "Please, honey, don't start crying again." "I'm trying not to." He rose slowly, head thumping, and took her in his arms. Comforting her was difficult, but he tried, whispering, "It'll come back eventually. For now, don't tell anyone I'm here. Please, don't tell a single soul." "But why, Nick?" "Because I could have killed someone. I could be a thief, a desperado. I don't know. I could even have gotten married. Oh, darling." She collapsed on his shoulder, crying again. "Honey, I didn't say that's what I've done," he said. "It's just that I don't know. Whatever I am, I can take my medicine, but I want to know first. You've got to understand that." She tried a smile through her tears. He knew it was his duty to comfort her. She'd been through hell. She had the memories, he did not. Despite his alien feelings, he knew she alone could help him. Whether he loved her or not was immaterial. He needed her to show him to the man he was. Perhaps it would all come back then. "I'm sorry, Nick. I'll try to help." "Thanks, honey." "Hungry?" she asked, turning the flame under the coffee pot. "It is not," she said. "There's apple pie and I can whip up sandwiches or something. Coffee and pie is fine, in a way. It'll be like courting all over again." She smiled. "We'll make a whole lot of new memories to take the place of the old." I'm interested in the old ones right now, he told her glumly. Things have happened so fast, it's hard to accustom to the thing. I know, she mused softly. He looked at her steadily. Beth, when did you last see me? 13 months ago. No. I mean, where was I going? What was I doing? She remembered. You were going up to the cabin to repair the fireplace and build lawn furniture. You were going to stay overnight and come back the evening of the second day. When you didn't return, Nolan took me up to look. Your car was there, but you were gone, no clues. She shook her head. Nothing. We thought you injured yourself, but I couldn't accept that. You were always a good woodsman, even in desolate country like that, secluded. Huh? Some of the worst country in the state. We bought the place so we could get away from the mess in the city, he smiled. Apparently, they had escaped one mess only to fall victim to another. She sliced him a huge piece of pie and set it before him, still smiling bravely. She poured coffee, black with a lump of sugar. He forked pie into his mouth, uneasy. A stranger feeding him, loving him, knowing more about him than he did. He bolted the pie and gulped the coffee hurriedly. When finished, he glanced at the clock. Above the pink refrigerator, the clock read 9:15. Tired, dear? She asked. He nodded dully. Now, he thought, I suppose I'm to crawl into bed with her. He felt trapped, panic-stricken, but she was his wife. He'd probably slept with her 13 months before. Why the horror? We'll go to bed now, she decided. I usually turn in early, have to work, you know. I'll sleep on the sofa, Nick mumbled. She blinked at him. You'll do no such thing. You'll march right upstairs. You'll march right upstairs to bed, Nick Danson. And the die, he figured, was cast. In the final analysis, he was just too tired to attempt an explanation, not physically worn out, but mentally. Since just before dawn, he felt on a fantastic merry-go-round. Feeling strange, he allowed her to lead him upstairs to the bedroom. The sight of one bed startled him. Though it was large, she smiled coyly and forced a grin. She installed him in the bathroom, tossed a pair of pajamas and left. He took a long time showering and shaving, then, avoiding it no longer, he went into the bedroom. She was combing her satiny hair at the dresser, now in an aqua-colored nightgown. His breath caught. Then he slid into bed and watched until she came beside him. She fell to her knees, eyes shining, fingers in his hair, breasts pressing boldly on his arm as if they belonged. I love you so much, Nick, she whispered softly. He touched her cheek, alarmed yet thrilled. I love you too, Beth, he whispered. Her lips pressed gently upon his, a promise of the love waiting in her arms. A tremor ran through him as she flicked the wall switch and darkness sheathed the room. Moonlight filtered through curtains, her live shape molding tightly to his. You don't love me, darling. We love with our minds, but you lost yours to you. I'm a stranger. You'll have to learn again, she said, hand clamping over his mouth. But me, Nick, it's different. I've waited 13 months. Pretend I'm anything ... but make love to me. Pay no attention to anything except me, she pleaded. His mouth silenced her words in a kiss, hands smoothing down the silk. It won't be hard, Beth, he whispered. You're beautiful ... it won't be hard to love you. She twisted, stripping away the nightgown barrier. He stroked her into passion, her arms pulling him close, her body both imprisoning and freeing him at once. Later, when she slept, he studied her face in moonlight before sleep claimed him. His uniform was torn by purple bushes, thorns ripping, blood streaking his trousers. His face was smeared with dirt, hand wet with sweat on the auto pistol. His stomach was tight with fear. They were out there, waiting for him, radar ready to spot him. There was no escape. Commander Emery had bungled every assignment, and now First Spacer Laws would die in the supreme blunder that had created the first uprising. He looked up the mountain face. Nothing moved, but he knew they were there. He peered into the valley. The patrol car was still, its driver grotesquely on the ground. A heavy spear pinned his chest, pointing skyward. On the slope, one enemy lay dying, greenish fluid pumping, yellow eyes blinking, slash mouth working without sound. The antennae swiveled limply, then drooped as the alien died. He clutched the pistol, saw them point left, swung quickly, but saw only desert grass swaying in faint air. They should have gotten the message. A ship was probably on its way. He checked ammunition. Plenty, but only 15 shots. If they rushed him, he would be doomed. He wished he had the projectile launcher from the wrecked patrol car. Damned natives and their uprisings. He searched the sky, cold sweat trickling down his face. Scenes of other uprisings flickered through his mind, and the horrible remains of tortured captives he had reached too late. Those had been small. This one was real. The native seemed to materialize out of the ground, screaming shrill obscenities as he rose to 9 feet in height and brandished a heavy maul over his head in rage. He came leaping up the hill of tumbled rocks, and Tenny pointed at first Spacer Laws. Behind him came 8 more. He fired the auto pistol, ripping the alien's face. The bullet tore away one blinking yellow eye. The alien screamed and fell. He fired again and again, dropping to more before the charge broke into chaos around him. At a sound, he whirled, terrified at an alien behind him. The charge had been a fake, a stunt any green spacer could see. He stared into the large eyes, then fired. Another native rose, then another and another. He fired repeatedly, crying and cursing at the weapon's inefficiency, while above him roared the engines of rescue. Tongues of flame poured over the massive aliens. He hoped the ship was not too late. Nick, darling. He awoke, face drenched with sweat, stomach knotted. In fright, he grabbed the woman at his side, holding her tightly. She stroked his hair, kissed his face and whispered soothing words. "What is it, Nick?" she asked. He relaxed, laying back on the pillow. In moonlight, he returned to himself. "Nightmare," he croaked. She smiled, kissed him. "Apple pie," she said, "causes nightmares." It was so real, he muttered. I was on another planet, in a blue uniform with yellow stripes. My name was Loz. Natives in revolt killed my driver. I was surrounded. "Science fiction," she cooed, stroking his hair. "It's a good sign. You always read science fiction. Your mind put you in the hero's place." He sat up, still shaken. "Did I cry out?" "You were mumbling, then sobbing and thrashing." He ran fingers through his hair. The dream's reality too much. It was frightening, like a memory. He stood up, patted her shoulder. "Go back to sleep. Beth, I'm going downstairs. Shall I turn on a light?" "No, it might cause neighbors to wonder. Moon is enough." He sat in the living room chair, thinking. The dream was unlike a dream, with vivid colors, violet sky, 9-foot monsters. It felt like memory, almost supernatural. Fister, it seemed a planet's name. Maybe Beth was right. Maybe confusion from a head injury. Could he believe he had lived stories he once read? What would be next? Macbeth, Treasure Island, Christ, what a world. A doctor, a head shrinker, might fix it. But what if he was a criminal? 13 months was long. Anything could happen. Maybe he had worked, eaten, loved, even married again. A psychologist? No, he needed more about Nicholas Danson first. The cabin Beth mentioned would show him little. After a year, any trail was gone, sifted by Nolan Bryce. Bryce? Of all friends, he had to be tied to a cop. He'd have to be careful, or Bryce would be on his trail. The crash worried him. How had he survived with cuts and bruises? Luck, maybe. But had he left a clue? He burned the flying suit, tried to cover with Andy. Still odd. The suit was strange material, but burned. Almost without realizing, he stared at the car outside. A Chevrolet, Andy had described it. 2 men sat inside watching. Fear knotted his stomach as he saw the driver's blonde hair gleam. The men from Andy's station. Nick. It was Beth, framed in the doorway, alluring in her nightgown. She started to speak, but he hissed for silence. "Come here, Beth, and don't put on a light." She came to his side. He pointed out the car, explained about the men. "What do they want?" she asked, leaning on him, her breasts disturbing his focus. "I don't know. Give me a minute to get upstairs." "Snap the light, move around. They're looking for me. I'll give impression I'm not here." He knelt at the bedroom window. The light came on downstairs. The men sat in the car, watching the house. Finally the car rolled off, lights out, then on again as it disappeared. Beth returned. "Nick. Here, perhaps they saw the crash. No one saw me crash." He cut. "I mean, later," she said. "A wrecked car on a highway with double quotes car." "Beth, I didn't crash in a car. I crashed in a plane, on a wooded mountain." She gasped. "Oh, darling, don't be silly." You've never been in a plane in your life. In darkness, Nick could only stare in stunned amazement at the moonlit outline of his wife. Detective Lieutenant Nolan Bryce stood in the brush near the wrecked aircraft, watching the men move about in the light of several spotlights set up by the National Guardsmen. The thick blackness of the surrounding forest, plus a glance at his watch, told him that dawn wasn't too far away. FAA investigator Dixon, a thin, stringy ex-pilot, stepped around the wreckage. He offered a light to the dead cigarette in Nolan's mouth. "Thanks," Bryce said and blew the smoke to the night. "What do you make of it, Mr. Dixon?" Dixon shrugged and pushed his snap brim hat back. "Dunno, it's pretty dark to see much, but it's no private plane. Why do you say that?" "No wings, no tail assembly. When it gets light enough, we'll know the story," Dixon muttered. "But I don't know of any private plane that looks like that one." Then too, the army is holding the newsboys at bay. "I think those two government fellows are playing this one close to their chests." Bryce nodded and dragged on the cigarette, but he said nothing about the speed of the thing. "Any bodies?" Dixon shook his head. "The thing is pretty well burned. Could be bodies scattered. We did find a kind of flying suit, though badly burned and torn, just the suit. No one in it." Dixon looked perplexed. "Bothers you, huh? Me too, I can't figure it out." "Oh, well, it'll all come out when we really start investigating. How long does a thing like that take?" Dixon shrugged. "A couple of days, a week. Even a few months, it's hard to say." Bryce nodded, took a final drag on the cigarette and tossed it toward the wreck, watching the red ash burst near the wreck. Dixon had wandered off to the far side of the crash-made clearing. Hell, Bryce thought, I'd better get that butt. Leaving a thing like that around here could get me in trouble. They'd think it was part of the crash. Then he saw the light glint on a small gold object. He picked it up and found that he had someone's watch. The crystal had been smashed, likely in the crash, and the hands were stopped at 4:15. The expansion band watch dispelled his hunch. He thought the pilot might have been a Russian, but it was a Belova, and he didn't think Russians had them. On the underside of the face, he could read clearly, "To Nick, love, Beth," and suddenly, it was there. He knew the watch. He knew it as well as he knew his own hell. He had picked it up at the jeweler's shop in Everett 2 years before, when Beth wanted to surprise Nick. Stunned and puzzled, Bryce dropped the watch into his pocket and decided not to say anything to Cartwell and Morgan. Maybe it would cost him later, but he couldn't tell them yet, not now. He lit another cigarette and stood there thinking about the watch. How had it gotten here? Nick didn't know how to fly a plane, and even if he had studied, could he fly something so fast? Hell no, nor had the watch been there, in the weather, all this time. Of course, Nick could have pawned the thing somewhere and by fate it ended up back here. Possible. But Bryce didn't believe it. It just didn't fit. Seen enough. Bryce turned and saw Cartwell standing behind him. How long had he been there, he wondered, and forced a grin. The stocky blonde grinned back knowingly. "Thought you might want a cup of coffee," he said. "Where the hell will you get coffee out here?" Cartwell waved an arm toward the foot of the hills. "A farm down there. They wake up early. Sam conned the farmer's wife into making coffee for the boys. Want some? Might as well. We have a few minutes, in fact, a lot of time before daylight." "Getting tired?" Cartwell asked. "A little. More like anxious to find out what the tale is on that wreck." "You've been talking to Dixon, I see." Bryce nodded. "Yeah. One thing we know. It's apparently some kind of experimental aircraft. Like a rocket or something, and if it isn't one of ours... double quotes. Bryce left it hang and Cartwell didn't pick it up. For a few minutes they walked in silence through the dew-splattered forest. They homed in on the glow of yellow lights that winked at them through the branches. Finally, they reached the dirt road that twisted along the stream bed toward the framed shape of the farmhouse. Cartwell broke the silence as they neared the place. "Don't talk much about the wreck around these people, Nolan. They're nice folks, but simple-natured. They plant by the phases of the moon. The biggest event in their lives is going to the state fair. They're Lancaster Dutch, recently imported, and they believe in the hex signs they painted on the barn." Bryce nodded. "Okay, John." The farm couple were strangers to Bryce, but their type was familiar. Pennsylvania was full of them. They were good people, farmers, a few jumps above the witchcraft stock that had birthed them. They were the stay-at-home type, to whom Pittsburgh was the far west, and if forced to move 50 miles away, relations would scream they'd never see them again. The woman asked them in kindly. She poured their coffee, plain appearing, with no makeup and hair pulled back into a severe knot. Nolan liked her instantly. In her own slow way, she was a fine person. Her world was the farm. "Have you found that poor pilot yet?" she asked, setting the coffee before them. "No, ma'am," Cartwell told her. She clucked her mouth, honest to true. "You'd wonder why a thing like that happened. There'll be some poor woman in tears tonight." "Do you think he was married?" "I don't know, ma'am," Cartwell said. "It's the children that suffer ... double quotes," she said softly, then let the words trail off. Dixon came in. He smiled at the farm wife and she poured him a cup of coffee. Dixon pulled off his hat. "I'd like to thank you for being so kind ... double quotes." The woman flushed and waved it away. "Bosh," she said, smiling. "It's the least a body can do. I'd be glad to have someone helping. Were it my boy up there, your boy flies." "He did," she looked pained. "He was killed during the war." "I'm sorry," Dixon said, reaching for a donut from the plate. A silence fell over them as they waited for dawn. Nolan was glad to be spared conversation. He felt like a criminal with the watch. He wanted to tell Dixon and Cartwell, but he couldn't. For the first time in his life, he was hiding evidence. He knew what the watch meant. It was personal now, and until he knew more, he'd wait. If Nick Danson had somehow come back in that wreck and, if they found no bodies, he would have gone to Beth. The whole thing would be complicated beyond belief. What would happen to her? What would happen to the woman he loved if Nick Danson was back? He stared moodily into the dark liquid in his cup and wondered where it would all end. As the night gave way to dawn, Nick awoke to sunlight streaming into his face and had a momentary impression that it was dawn. Then he realized the sunlight had a reddish cast. He blinked at the clock, shocked at the time. He was amazed to find that he had slept until late afternoon. My God, he thought grudgingly. 292. His headache was nearly gone, he noticed as he threw off the covers and swung his long legs to the floor. The soreness was still there, thumping dully in his stiff muscles, but sleep had been deep and brought no fresh nightmares to worrying about. He cleaned himself up in the bathroom and got a pair of slacks and a shirt from the closet, still feeling somewhat like a stranger. While he dressed himself, he thought of the woman he was married to. Despite the feeling of being a stranger in a strange world, he found himself feeling delightful tremors when he thought of Beth. Even now, there was a tight, fluttering sensation in his insides when he thought of the talcum satin of her skin, the warm lift of her brightly nippled breasts, and the strong response of her thighs. She was a beautiful woman. She was sex all rolled up in a frame of gentle curves and soft flesh. And he could see that to love a woman like her would not only be easy, it would be a privilege. He buckled the belt about his waist, trying to dispel the thoughts of the woman, and went downstairs to the kitchen. Hunger gnawed at him violently. The coffee was cold. He turned the gas on. The note on the table caught his eye. He picked it up to scan it briefly. "Darling, had to rush off to work. Kissed you goodbye and you said glump. Be home soon. Love you terribly." He grinned at the note, balled it into his fist and threw it into the paper can. When the coffee was hot, he poured himself a cup and fixed a couple of sandwiches with cold meat left in the package. As he was finishing the last couple of bites of the sandwich, he heard the thud of the evening paper against the front door. For a moment, it startled him. Then he realized what it was. He was half out of the chair but paused, then sank back into his seat. He couldn't go out there and get the paper if the neighbors saw him picking it up. He sat waiting for Beth to come home. The suspense dug into his guts with ragged teeth. Had they found the plane? Were they onto him? Who were those two men? How did they know where to find him? Why were they looking for him? He drank down near the whole pot of coffee and watched the hands of the electric clock move with agonizing slowness. Finally, at 5:40, Beth drove up to the house and came through the door. Nick leapt from the chair. The paper. He snatched it from her hands and began tearing it open. "Damn newsboys for folding them, Nick. Aren't you going to kiss me, huh?" He kissed her briefly, fleetingly, and returned to the paper. The crash was on page 1. Everett, Pa. The smoldering wreckage of what was apparently a private plane was found late yesterday. It was discovered in the heavily wooded area north of the city by a young Boy Scout looking for a campsite. Benjamin Talbot, age 13, called local police, who dispatched investigators to the wreck. Detective Lieutenant Nolan Bryce, Everett Rescue Squad, and FAA investigator Aaron P. Dixon examined the wreckage. "It's the most unusual crash site I've ever seen," Dixon told local newsmen. "There's no evidence of wings or tail assembly. The fuselage is also of a strange design." Lieutenant Bryce informed newsmen that no private aircraft had been reported in trouble or over that area. "One plane may have gone unnoticed," Bryce admitted, "highly unlikely, but possible. What puzzles me is that the aircraft has not been identified and there have been no bodies found. The Civil Air Patrol has been cooperative and are now engaged in an air search," Dixon said. While rescue squads work in the mountains, he stated that the mystery crash will be investigated. The aim is to determine the make and model of the plane and the fate of its occupants. At present, the site has been roped off and placed under guard by local militiamen, only authorized personnel allowed. Major Gilbert Donaway of the Air Force Experimental Wing refused to say if the plane was Air Force origin. "To my knowledge, we have lost no test planes. However, a full check will be run." "Test plane?" Nick stared in amazement at the words. "Test plane? What the hell was going on in this screwy world? No wings, no tail assembly, no mayday calls, no record of the plane. The whole damned thing sounded ridiculous. Coupled with the fact that he had been out of touch for 13 months, it all became weird. And to top it all off, Nolan Bryce was one of the investigators. Suppose he, Nick, had left something at the scene, a fraternity pin, a slip of paper, anything that would link the crash to the fact that he was alive and in Everett. They'd all be on his tail. "Nick," Beth pouted, "will you pay a little attention to me for a change?" "I'm sorry, honey, but it's the plane." While she listened, he read the account aloud and, when finished, they exchanged glances. "That's the plane I was in," he told her. "But you don't know how to fly. I must know, unless someone else flew it." "That's the plane I woke up beside. I must have been in the damned thing, but I don't know if anyone else was." He buried his face in his hands. "Nick, should we call the police?" "No." Alarmed at his outburst, she put her hand on his shoulder. "All right, dear, I'm sorry. It'd been different if those men weren't after me. I'd call the police if they weren't dogging my tracks. I'd turn myself in just to find out what the hell's going on." "Me too," she said softly. At first, he didn't catch her meaning. Then he blinked. "What? The car, the black one, it followed me to work this morning," she said. "It didn't follow me home though." Nick slammed the paper. His lean jaw muscles knotted in anger. "That settles it," he snapped. "I can face whatever I'm mixed up in, but there's no earthly reason why you should be subjected to it. I'll have to get out." Beth threw herself into his arms, tears welling in her eyes. "No, Nick," she pleaded, "whatever it is, we'll fight it. We'll make out, but darling, don't leave me again." He held her tightly against him. His hand stroked the warm softness of her back and spine. The perfume of her hair filled him with thoughts of summer fields, sweetness, tenderness, love. Nick told himself he was falling in love. "And we'll go away," Beth whispered in his ear. "We'll pack everything and go far away, where we'll never see these men again. Nick, please, oh please keep me with you. Going away won't settle it. They'll always be there, just outside the door. I've got to do something." He broke off suddenly. It flicked into his mind like a film of the past, like a memory. The soft face of the golden-haired girl, the backdrop of Oka Mountains, the pale blue-green tree, the filmy dress whirling around her ankles. Then she was coming back, arms outstretched, kissing him lovingly. He clamped it from his mind. A memory that made no sense at all. A tremor of fear ran along his spine and trembled in his flesh. What did it mean? What was happening to him, Nick? It was Beth. "You look pale and frightened." "Nothing, we'll go away." She beamed. "I know just the place, the cabin. Far up in the mountains. No one will know we're there. We'll learn to love each other again. You have to work," he said. She nodded. "That's true. Still, you could go up there and try to puzzle this all out. I can come up in the evenings, and on weekends. Might be a good idea," he admitted. "At least I'll be safe there. Then it's settled. You go sit somewhere and I'll get things packed." She whisked away, almost running up the stairs to pack some things. He walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, stood quiet. Through the window, twilight faded into evening. heavy purple clouds sweeping steadily across the sky. A star winked later Venus. He picked out many others as they flickered into being. She came into his arms and talk was insignificant, unnecessary. Her arms wound about his neck, fingers tugged playfully at his hair, and she smiled at him, his lips moved down against hers. They were lost in themselves. He felt the taut pressure of her breasts playing against his chest, the firm roundness of her thighs working against his. Her strong fingers worked on his shoulders. She pulled him down onto the moss beneath the strange tree, her body molded into his. His hands stroked her breasts beneath the filmy cloth. Her hands pulled the straps down from her shoulders. He helped, working the straps down until the firm mounds of her breasts lifted their coral-tipped nipples toward the sky. His fingers kneaded them while his mouth worked on hers passionately. When he released her lips, she pulled his face down into the twin cushions of her breasts. His hand moved caressingly against the flesh of her thighs. Ready, dear, it was gone, just like that. A sudden flickering memory of some long-vanished event that might have given him hope. It had been fantastic, with strange colors and weird landscape, but he wanted it despite that. She stole it away. He turned and smiled at her as she came into the kitchen. She had turned on a soft light in the front room, but let the kitchen remain dark. In the half-light, she was the most beautiful woman he'd seen. It would not be hard to love her, he thought again. He took her shoulders, pulled her gently against him to kiss. Her mouth moved against his, satiny with desire, until they parted. I'm ready, if you are. For what, darling, the bedroom, or the car? He'd chuckled, the car, the bedroom will keep until we're up in the woods. In the glow of the headlights, the car swallowed the road voraciously and they moved toward the North Country. Not, he noticed, on Route 87, they had not been seen leaving the city, nor had they been seen packing the car. The garage had a door that led into the kitchen, and Nick had laid on the back seat floorboards until they were in the country. Now, sitting in the front seat, he wondered vaguely if Beth, in her joy at having him home, had given herself away to her friends. He hoped not. He glanced sidewise at her. He noticed that she drove with a smile on her face. Is it far to the cabin? He asked. Not now. We're almost to the turn-off. He lapsed again into silence, the old questions whirling. Who were the men who were after him? What did they want? How much had the FAA learned of the plane? Had they found something to pin it on him? What were these fleeting thoughts? Was his mind trying to tell him something via the nightmares? And what of his best friend, Nolan Bryce? Where has he been? What is he up to? It struck Nick as odd he hadn't encountered him. Surely he and Beth had been close the past year. How close? Suppose Bryce stumbled upon Andy Hokum. Would the old man talk? Feeling more helpless than he ever had, Nick stared at the road. Beth turned off on another road, little more than a wagon track beside a small creek. A few minutes of bouncing over ruts and stones, and she turned off again, parking beside a grey frame cabin. Here we are, darling. They got out, each taking a box from the back seat, and Nick followed her up the stairs to the porch. Beth set her box down and found the key. The lock clicked open. Wait till I find the light, Nick, she whispered. A moment later, the light snapped on and a soft glow filled the front room of the cabin. They carried the boxes to the kitchen, then returned. Nick studied the place. He liked the room. There was rugged manliness in the stone fireplace and knotty pine walls, mingled with Beth's femininity. It was well laid out, with all paintings on the walls. Like it? Beth asked. He nodded. But it doesn't bring back any memories. No, hell, honey, I can't even remember what I did for a living. She smiled subtly. Want to see? When he nodded, she motioned him to the other side of the room and opened the door. She flicked on the light and he stepped into a small study filled with the trappings of an artist. Tubes of paint lay on small tables, beside cans of turpentine, lacquer and old paint rags. A half-finished nude adorned one of the easels. Watercolor sketches and oils were scattered about the room. You've just finished watching the first part of the Sexual Lives of the Gods. Since the video has run quite long, I'll pause the story here. I wish all of you good health, success, and happiness in your lives. And I truly hope you'll continue to support the Good Stories channel by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing it with your friends or on your social media so more people who love great stories can discover our channel. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next part of the story.